So we're going to talk today about the Ionizer 1001 from ProEco. This is our entry-level ionizer. Works wonderful on small water features, your pondless water features, your ponds up to say a couple of thousand gallons with or without fish. Primarily where stringy algae is prevalent but not out of control. Stringy algae is most affected by copper ionization, whereas other types of algae are not. They're more affected by UV, bacteria, filtration, that type of stuff. But you can really keep the stringy algae out of water features really well with copper. And it's non-toxic in as low levels as you normally get with ionizers. And I'll explain how we make sure we get the right levels. So I'm just going to open this up and turn it around here. So in the box you have a couple of key components. So first off, we have our power supply, and I'll explain that in a minute. And then we have our ionizer right here. And these are the anodes that are in here. These are the copper anodes. And I'll go through that in a second. And then we have test strips. And there is an instruction booklet, as well as there are two fittings for when you go to plumb it in if you have different types of pipes. Rather than 2-inch, you want to use 1.5 inch. You'd glue in those bushings and go from there. So explaining the copper anode, here's how this works. So this gets plumbed in line from the water flow from the pump. You can put it into filters, you can put it into streams and let the water pass by, but it's not as efficient. The most efficient place is to have this where the water flow from the pump is passing the water by. You never want to install it upright. You always want to install it on its side or below. Now the reason for that, if I put it like this, oxygen can sit up inside there, and that oxygen reduces the efficiency of the copper. If I put it on its side, all the air will come out, and when the water's running by, the ions from the anodes will be picked up by the algae cells, and it works really, really efficiently. As this is operating, these anodes will begin to decrease. So typically you want to check this once a year, definitely every 2 years, because once they get down to where you almost have nothing left, they're really beginning, you need to replace the anodes at that point. Also, if they're corroded up and covered by algae, that's really bad. So what can happen is algae, if it's going past there in big chunks, can begin to build up, and it will actually bridge the anodes, and if that gets bridged, it can actually short out the power. So you just got to pull this out, clean it, turn around, put it back in, power it back up, and usually you're good to go and you haven't damaged anything. But sometimes if you leave it for too long, you can damage the power supply, and you just need to replace this part. Okay? The way you replace it is you turn off your pump, turn off the water flow. You'll end up draining it. You just unthread this, put in a new one, thread it back in, and you want to make sure that's angled in so that the anodes are facing that way. All right? How it operates is really quite simple. A small electrical current is passed from the power supply into here. It's DC power, and it's very low. You're only going to be running between 1 watt or 1 volt right up to 12 volts. And what happens is that electrical current will release a copper anode or copper ion from one of these. Now, based on the polarity, it will release all from one side or the other side. And what will happen is it has a negative charge, and your algae cell, as it comes through the water column and it's microscopic, it has a charge, and the opposite charges will attract. So what happens is, as all the algae cells go through, all the negatives will go through, and the positive ions will be attached to the negative algae cells, and it kills those algae cells. Now, what you want to do on this is, when you've powered this up, every once in a while, you're going to flip the polarity. That's your polarity switch right there. And you're just going to switch that back and forth like every couple of days or once a week. And you're setting your voltage down here. I like to set it in the middle. And then based upon the water and the amount of algae, stringy algae I have in there, I'll then turn it up or turn it down. Okay? You just want to keep that adjusted. You don't need to put more in. And the other thing is, the less power I have, the less ions get released. The less ions that get released, the slower the anodes will get used up. Now, As well, if these get dirty and coated with alkalinity and that type of stuff, they don't release the ions as efficiently. So you definitely want to be checking these and making sure that they're not really dirty. That's the beauty of this clear tea. It allows you to check it once in a while. And I understand that you might come in here and this may be dirty with pond water. When you go to pull this out, just have a little scrub brush you can stick in there and clean that. And so that way you can visually check your ionizer frequently. All right. I'll go through a little bit more now. So as the ionizer is operating, as I explained, you're going to plug this in, you're going to power it up. So based on the water volume, I'm going to set that in the middle. The bigger the volume of water, the higher I'm going to be setting it. The lower the volume of water, the lower I'm going to set it. When I have a perfectly clean pond, I just kind of set it in the middle initially and see what happens. As the ionizer is operating, basically it should be releasing copper ions. Now those copper ions, when they come in contact with an algae cell, they will attach themselves to that algae cell, they'll kill the algae cell, but the algae cell ends up coating the copper ion and making it inert. So if you release a bunch of copper into the pond, it won't actually stay residual in the pond if it's being neutralized by algae. If it kills all the algae and there's no cells for the copper ion to attach itself with, you'll end up increasing the copper levels in the pond, and that's where the test strips come in. So what we do with these test strips is once a week, you don't have to do it every day, once a week is perfectly fine. You're going to go in and you're going to test your water. I like to do it always about the same time every time. So don't do it in the morning one day and then a week later do it at night, because your water chemistry actually changes in your pond throughout the day. So it's always good to kind of do it about the same time. You don't have to be precise, just roughly. And I like to do it in the same location. Or for instance, if you feed your fish or something like that, try to do it before you feed your fish so that any of the chemicals in the food or the fish stir up isn't necessarily going to impact your testing right then. So what ends up happening, you're going to test your pH, your copper, and your alkalinity. And these things are really important. First off, your pH is important because of a couple of issues. We've noticed consistently, whenever we have stringy algae, we have typically high pH. Your pH is up around the 7.8, higher, above 7. And 7.2, 7 is a really nice neutral area. All these instructions, by the way, are in the instruction booklet, so you don't necessarily have to memorize everything I'm telling you. The next thing you want to be checking is your total alkalinity. And here's why. If you have a lot of alkalinity in your water, it really makes it hard for us to change the pH. As well, the alkalinity counters the copper. Instead of the copper attaching itself to an algae cell, it ends up attaching itself to a alkalinity. And because of that, it doesn't do the job that it should do. So we found that ideally we want to have the alkalinity down and around the 80 to 120 mark in here. If you're above that 120 and you're up on that high scale, you're going to have it's going to be really hard for us to efficiently deal with the stringy algae in the pond with copper. So what we want to do is we want to lower the alkalinity. The other thing we know is that anytime we try and change the pH, it's really difficult to do that when the alkalinity is high. The high alkalinity acts as a buffer, so that if you try to change pH, it buffs anything we do with that altering the pH. So therefore, it's really tough to change the pH when you have high alkalinity. High alkalinity also really impacts pumps, everything else on the pond. It makes it much harder. So softer water actually is okay. It actually works really well. Your copper level, we want to keep the copper level in between 0.2 and 0.5. I want to explain this. Copper can exceed well beyond 1.3 and it's still safe to drink, all that type of stuff. Oftentimes you may see streams and rivers in certain areas of the environment where there's no algae growing or no stringy algae in slower moving water. And the reason for that is when you check the water, there may be copper already naturally in the environment. And so it's out there. Many streams I know of that have well above 1.3, almost 2 parts per million of copper. Beautiful water, crystal clear, no stringy algae, and it's completely safe to fish, frogs, everything. In fact, it's even safe to drink. Here, we're just going to be in this range. Now, I will explain something that's important. When you have a pond that has lots of stringy algae, you put in an ionizer, it's not going to instantly kill all the stringy algae right away. It will take time. It takes a while to build up enough copper anodes because we're just not dumping straight copper into the water. It will take time to decrease the algae, and that may take anywhere from several months, several weeks, right up to I've seen as long as 6 to 8 months. So don't expect it to just instantly change your pond. However, if you have it at startup, what's really nice is you won't develop that stringy algae. Now, if you have a pond that you had some stringy algae, you put in an ionizer, you begin to see it decrease, it begins to clean things up, and you're looking for the copper to come on the dipstick, but you just can't find any copper, like there's no skin color coming onto that test strip, that's because anytime a copper attaches itself, copper ion attaches itself to an algae cell, the algae cell ends up coating the copper and basically it becomes inert. So it won't be measured on here if it's done its job. It's only when you have an excess amount of copper ions in the water will those copper ions be able to be measured on this test strip. So if your pond is clear and it's doing its job, but you just can't get copper on here, don't worry about it. You're putting the right amount of copper in the pond is clear, it's working, and everything's fine. It's only when you have excessive amounts or exceeding more than you need, you'll end up beginning to see this on this test strip. And that's where you just want to be in that range. I've had many times where we've had crystal clear ponds. The ionizer's doing a great job. It's keeping all the stringy algae at bay. And no matter what we do, how much more we turn up the ionizer, we just can't get it to come onto here. It's still fine. It's doing its job. Okay, if we completely unplug the ionizer after several weeks, and it will take several weeks, about 6 to 8 weeks, all of a sudden lots of stringy algae can begin to grow and develop. Algae takes quite a while to develop, from microscopic to where it's visible to the human eye. Any other questions on the ionizer? We have downloads on the website of the instruction booklet, and give us a call or email us.